Good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be here and talk with you about integrative leadership, particularly given the challenges that society is facing. The more people who understand what integrative leadership is and try to cultivate it in their lives, the better I think we're going to be. It's a little ironic, though, to be doing this kind of talk at TED Talks, because integrative leadership in this setting kind of conjures up an old model of leadership. A white knight who comes in, we come onto the stage, we stand in our red Dodge, you're supposed to absorb the wisdom that we're espousing, and somehow we're positioned almost as the leaders. In thinking about leadership in this way, we pay attention to the traits of the individual, we have debates about our leaders, are they born or are they made? But actually, what society needs now is more of a focus on leadership. And leadership is a collective experience. Take even this TED Talk. The TED Talk isn't really about the people on the red dots as leaders. It's really these undergraduate students who had a vision that some of us at the University of Minnesota needed to come together to talk about our mission, to really probe with each other across our differences. What does it mean to be driven to discover, and what are the different ways that discovery is happening? They recruited the speakers, they trained us, they had us go through our talks. They also recruited all of you. And because of that, they've created this experience. Ultimately, it's their hope that this experience is about crossing boundaries. And so in that way, I think the experience of today is really trying to exemplify what integrative leadership is. It's the acts, large and small, that enable boundaries to be crossed and new solutions to emerge to collective problems. So if you're interested in learning more about integrative leadership, there are really three dimensions that I'd like to draw your attention to this morning. The first is know yourself and act from your core. Know yourself and act from your core. This sounds touchy-feely maybe, but it really requires you to think about what are my skills? What are the assets that I bring? What are the things that I put on my resume? What are the stories of my family? And what are the things that are the shadows in my life? The things I really don't want anybody to know, because as a leader and being in a leadership role, a lot of times those shadows come out and sabotage what you're trying to do. So I want to tell you some stories about some people that I know who really exemplify knowing themselves and acting from the core. The first is somebody who's actually in this audience, Sandy Wolfwood, who is a graphic designer. And she was increasingly concerned about the fact that what she knew from graphic design wasn't in any way informing public policy discussions and debates. And so in the last year, she has founded an effort in the state of Minnesota called Design for Good, where she's bringing together people who understand graphic design and having them have a forum to influence public policy around many different important topics. Or another of my colleagues, Tracy Moore, who as a member of the Minneapolis Fire Department was increasingly concerned that there was conflict between people in the fire department and new Americans that were living in the Cedar Riverside neighborhood who were reporting events to the fire department. The fire trucks would pull up and there's no fire. So Tracy began to try to understand the nature of this problem and realized that the new American Somalis that were living in Cedar Riverside had a very different notion about when they needed to reach out to institutions. And the firefighters themselves had really different notions about what constituted being able to be called to a situation. So she decided to start the Citizen Firefighter Academy. And she wants to bring people from these communities to the firehouse to demystify what happens in the fire station and for the firefighters to learn more about the Somali culture. Or finally, my colleague, Kevin Gertis, who as a soldier returning from the Iraq War was really grappling with deep challenges in himself as he tried to reconnect with his community and his family. And he realized that the National Guard deployment here had never been done before at such a scale as we've seen in the Iraq and Afghani wars. So he realized that he could change that situation and ask communities to step up and support our soldiers in a totally different way. He started an initiative called Beyond the Yellow Ribbon, which has become a model for national policy in how we integrate returning soldiers back into our communities. Now, none of these three individuals were in formal positions of authority. But what they did is they looked inside themselves and they thought, what do I know? What are core skills and experiences that I know that are being called into the collective arena to solve problems that we all share? And that's really the first dimension of integrative leadership. The second dimension is the ability to cross boundaries. Now, boundary crossing is challenging because many of the institutions that have been created in the last century were about carving things up into narrow pieces. Those of you who are undergraduates at the university, think about majors. Majors themselves are about putting bounds around a problem and a set of knowledge to help you develop particular expertise. But the challenges are, while that expertise is essential to helping us solve problems, it's often not adequate. Most of the challenges we face today are things that require us to cross boundaries. So when Sandy was thinking about the design for good, one of the competencies that she brought to crossing boundaries was to learn the language of another field. She came to the Humphrey School of Public Policy, learned policy analysis, learned how to articulate things in statistics, in economic terms, and she brought that competency to her ability to create the Design for Good initiative. When Tracy started to think about how she could integrate the fire department and the families in Cedar Riverside, she realized that actually concrete tools, artifacts, were important to bridging the boundaries between these things. So she asked people from the Somali community to bring food to the firehouse for her Citizens Academy. And she told the firefighters to welcome Somali kids up onto the fire trucks to touch the trucks and the hoses in their hats. Sometimes the ability to cross boundaries is as simple as having something concrete that bridges the differences and bridges the divide. The third technique of crossing boundaries is being able to have curiosity to understand the other. And when Kevin Gertis came home from Iraq, it was pretty clear to him that in order to help build the Yellow Ribbon campaign, he needed to be curious about how people in the community, like social welfare providers, thought about this problem. And he really went out of his way, went out of the narrow incentives in his system to cross the divide. So now I want to talk about the third dimension of integrative leadership, and that is really practice. Leadership is not about demonstrating expertise. It is about showing that you are willing to step up when the situation requires you to do so. I'm a potter, and so this concept of practice is not that difficult for me to get. Because if I go to a pottery wheel with a lump of clay and have a real clear idea of the objective I have to get, the pot's going to collapse. I lock up, I tense up. But if I go with a sense of practice and with the desire to cultivate whatever is going to come out of the moment and move with that and honor things that are going to emerge that could not be anticipated, I'm going to be more effective as a potter, and what I'm encouraging you to think about today, to be more effective as a leader. So if you think about these three dimensions, knowing yourself deeply, cultivating a practice so that you know your strengths and your limitations and acting when you can, learning how to more effectively cross boundaries, and coming to this all with a layer of practice, with an attitude of practice, I think you're going to find that leadership is abundant. And if that's true, given the problems we're facing as a society today, well, I think that's an idea worth spreading.